So on Friday, May 16th, Ben and I did a service learning project at Seahome Hill Arboretum with the LEAD program through Western. What we did was remove invasive species, and invasive species can be found in many different ways, but in our case, it's a plant from a different part of the world that is introduced to a new ecosystem. And this plant takes over where all the native plants used to grow and just spreads like wildfire and just takes up all the land. And it's extremely harmful because it decreases biodiversity, which is extremely important for an ecosystem to be sustainable. Biodiversity is the variety of life on Earth. It's the number of species of plants, animals, microorganisms, and it's extremely important for a sustainable ecosystem. So here we are taking out the roots of some invasive species behind the Fairhaven complex. English ivy is an invasive species found in Bellingham. It was brought over from Europe and was first introduced and put on Old Main because it looked beautiful growing up against the building, and it was removed from the building because they realized what an invasive species it was. But by that time it had already spread all over the Seahome Hill Arboretum, so there's a lot of projects working on it to try and remove that ivy from the Arboretum so that biodiversity can be brought back into the Arboretum. And sometimes the root of the English ivy can be extremely long. Another invasive species found in around Western is English holly. It was also brought to North America from Europe, and it was used for ornamental use. Holly can grow without very much sunlight, can grow in a variety of different soils, so it's a perfect invasive species because it can live everywhere and just takes over Arboretum and all the land.
In addition to tearing out invasive species, we also planted native plants, such as Oregon grape and sword fern. These are important for the ecosystem because they allow for biodiversity. They're not trying to outcompete each other because they're meant to be in that environment. Invasive species are not like that. They try to take over because they're better suited than the native plants are, which is why it's good to take out the invasive species and put in as much native plants as you can. Some benefits of having a lot of native plants are they use less water and you don't need to use pesticides because they're meant for that environment and they can grow on their own. One of the plants that we were putting into the arboretum were sword ferns. These plants are great for Washington climate because they survive in shady, moist areas. They also grow really fast, so it's easy to repopulate the area with sword ferns. They have a lot of benefits such as drought tolerance, fire resistance. They are tough plants and they can live in the most acidic of soils. So they're survivors and they're tough, which is why we want to plant them back instead of having all this English ivy. Another species that we were planting in the arboretum was Oregon grape. This is another native species to Washington, and Oregon grapes are really important for the ecosystem because they also allow for biodiversity. They aren't trying to outcompete all the other native species because they're meant to be there. They are perfectly suited for that climate. Because of the spiky green leaves, it is often confused for English holly, which is an invasive species. We were actually tearing that out when we did our service project. So you have to be careful when trying to determine